Well, Nelson Mandela and Emperor Haile Selassie, Alvin Ailey and Amiri Baraka, Rosa Parks and Maya Angelou, of course Muhammad Ali and Gloria Steinem, just a few of the more famous names in the portfolio of Brooklyn photojournalist Chester Higgins.
Yes, as a young man from the South, Chester Higgins arrived in New York in 1975, right in the middle of the decade we're examining this week. He'd already published his first book of images, Black Woman, a photographic response to the prevalence of negative and often stereotyped images of black women in mass media. And today we have him live here on BK Live. Welcome, Chester Higgins. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you very much, guys.
Of course. Now, it seems like your career kind of kicked off in the 1970s. What can you tell us about that?
Well, actually, I arrived in New York, and my first summer was '69, and I joined the Times in '75. But New York has always been the place where, as a photographer or a journalist, where it was a world stage. If you had something you wanted to show and you wanted to share it with the rest of the country, the rest of the world, New York was the place. Of course, I could share it with people in Alabama, but where I'm from in Alabama, they would agree with me, and it's not a wide audience. So New York was a necessity if you felt that your message had any sort of urgency to it, and that it was important that it reach a large audience, and especially an audience of decision makers. Yeah. So New York was a place that I had to come and to not only to perfect my skills, so it was competitive, but also to gain acceptance in that visual platform so that people could see it.
So you were working as an independent artist and developing your eye and honing that voice of yours, but you were also working for the world's leading newspaper. So how did you split your brain in two and do the work that was required for the paper and also have all this other work that was showing unseen things to people who that wasn't their experience?
Well, because my overall mission is to show when it comes to people of color, the three essential things that always goes missing in the media. And those are the issues of decency, dignity, and virtuous character. And by looking at that, as a human, with everybody, I figured that my mission is to bring that to the paper, whether I'm photographing people of color or white America, to show that there's a different way of looking at people. So I didn't really have to separate my head. I just really, it's the same head, but efforts going in two parallel directions, not necessarily different. So, and I guess also because I decided, because it was a mission to me, and I was young, that that's 24 hours in a day. So in college, you get used to sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night. Yeah. So in New York, which is, your job takes 8 hours, but then you have another 10 hours at your disposal that you can spend looking at New York in terms of your own personal work. So that's how I did it.
Let's take a look at some of your wonderful photographs. What can you tell us about these images that we're going to look at?
Legends like this. Can I tell you, this image has not left my Facebook timeline in some form or fashion since I joined Facebook like 10 years ago. Like the lions, come on.
Amiri Baraka and Maya Angelou at there was a Langston Hughes, the great poet. They put his ashes underneath this piece of art on the floor of the Schomburg Center, the New York Public Library Research Center in Harlem. And after the program, I wanted to do a photograph, and after the program was so academic and boring, but afterwards, when we came out, there was this jazz group that struck up, and then Amiri Baraka, who's very short, went over to ask this very tall woman, Maya Angelou, to dance, and they start cutting a rug, and to me, that was the picture that showed that in the African tradition, people tend to have a good time when people are buried, because you tend to, what they call, celebrate the life of the person. Right. On the continent, they call it kissing the memory, but it's the same concept. And so here, I thought it was dancing the memory, so to speak. This is a picture of Nelson Mandela. I'd always wanted to be in South Africa to photograph Mandela's release from jail, but instead, I was on my vacation working in Brazil. And I saw it on the tube. So I said, hey, well, if the spirit intends me to photograph Nelson Mandela. So what happened is 6 weeks later, I met him in Stockholm, visiting his friend Oliver Tambo, and I made that picture.
Yeah.
Here's one of Al Sharpton.
This is the before picture.
Before he lost those 100 and some odd pounds.
The before picture.
Yes,
Yeah.
where he had more chest to vibrate his voice and what have you.
Yeah.
But still with that James Brown hairdo.
Yeah.
And Alice Walker, who was in a Brooklyn neighborhood talking about her book and doing a book signing. And this is capturing her with people. I liked, when I read people's work, it gives me sometimes an insight into them.
Before or after? So ideally, would you have read her whole over? Or?
I'd read her work before, so you get a sense of the thinking mechanism that goes through in the mind. Because essentially, in my photographs, I tried to do what I call interior portraits to capture what's the spirit of the person, but also the inner workings that makes them unique. Here's a picture of the Emperor Haile Selassie, the last emperor of Ethiopia, made in '73 on my trip to Ethiopia to look at African heads of states. That year was an interesting year for me because it was the first time I visited Egypt and the first time I visited Ethiopia, and I was quite moved by the presence of His Majesty, and this is a picture from that.
I'm wondering, what are some of the things you miss about Brooklyn and New York in the 1970s?
The picture you have behind you right now, I miss, because you don't have that anymore. Where the kids take over the streets at night or in the daytime, and they paint and they draw all sort of kinds of things.
What neighborhood was this?
This is in Fort Greene. This is at the top of the Fort Greene Park.
Okay.
On Washington Park, where I was living at the time. Here you had, I also miss, the kind of street events that people would just impromptu show up and like this guy here, and the street event is going on, and he shows up with his guitar and he or the block parties that will go on, or even when the kids are not in the water hydrants, but just having a little contest of who's the best dancer. This shot of down in Dumbo area. I don't know if that building is going to be torn down. It has been torn down, but.
What do you shoot with now?
Well, I don't shoot anymore with the camera. I'm now shooting with. I'm doing
an iPhone.
I use an iPhone an awful lot. In fact, I got the 7 Plus because you can go 1x and 2x very easily. It's a very good camera.
Yeah. Now, could you have done this with an iPhone? Go back to that image. Give us those eyes again.
Probably not. But when I shoot, I use a Canon. I use a 35mm digital Canon. But I'm just hesitant because there's no camera or lens that can make a picture. Only your eye can make a picture. So I tell people that because you shouldn't feel that the instrument is something that is holding, that's in between you and it.
Gotcha.
It's you are the one who will be directing the instrument to become the tool to capture something that makes your heart smile. This is also with this is using lights in the studio, but also with a 35mm camera.
And is there one more image that we're going to see?
This is my work in Egypt. I guess I've traveled to Egypt about 20 times since '73, and also equally Ethiopia, looking at antiquity sites, temples, pyramids, tombs, all kinds of artifacts.
So you have this career that stretched from the '70s right till this minute. What's left to photograph? What have you not seen through your lens that the world needs you to capture before you just move on?
You mean before my spirit changed addresses?
That too, yeah. Before you have to kiss the spirit ride. I haven't hastening that at all. But I'm saying, what's left? What's the image that you're still looking for?
It's always the next one.
Yeah.
Always the next one. One of my mentors said, if someone asks you what's your most favorite thing that you produce, and if you have one, that means you stop thinking. You stop being creative, because your next image has to be your best one, not something that you can rest your laurels on.
Yeah.
So overall, for people that weren't living here during the 1970s, how would you say Brooklyn has changed from the 70s to now, 2016?
Well, we don't have crack vials on the street. And what was great about Brooklyn in the 70s for people who had limited income and limited opportunities were the parks. Prospect Park has always been a great park, and it's just a better park even now.
Yeah.
Fort Greene Park at the time when I lived was then covered with a lot of chain link fences all over the walkways and glass, and it was not a very safe place to be in. I noticed in my photographs from back then, the park used to be ringed with seats for people to sit down, and even concrete tables so they can and where people will play games on. But those have been taken away. There was problems with that because, homeowners were finding that people were staking out when they left, and and a lot of burglaries, house burglary, it was going on. Yeah. But there was also what's missing is that a lot of people who were just had a very sort of laid-back street sensibility to themselves and a friendliness to themselves. That's now been replaced. But the only thing certain in life is change, and change, the effect of change is determined by what side of the change you're on.
Does it seem like money ruined things? Because now everyone knows that if you live on Fort Greene and you're by the park, it's like millions and millions, and that's your buy-in. And maybe that feeling of friendliness, people don't feel it's connected because everybody's an island or something.
Well, it's not that money has that effect, but it depends upon the person. Not all people with money feel insecure, and not all people with money are not gregarious. It depends upon the person. Some people have more fear than others, and they act on it. But I think any relationship is based upon openness and a desire not to judge the other person. And when people feel that it's a judge-free environment and you can be human with each other, then things, I find, tend to work in a more positive direction.
Well, thank you very much for being here and sharing your wonderful work and talking about Brooklyn in the 1970s. We appreciate you very much. Thank you very much.
We're going to get to talk about photo magazines and all that jazz. You'll have to come back, yes? All right, done.